Hey, what's up you guys, The Curious Owl here, and today I am doing the last 10 books tag. So this was a tag created by Mark Nash, and I will leave his video down in the description for you guys, as well as all of the questions, but this is a tag basically talking about the last 10 books within certain categories that you read and kind of talking about them. So without further ado, let's get started. The first one is the last book you didn't finish. I think honestly the last book I DNF'd was Insomnia by Stephen King, and that was over the summer, and I had a whole video talking about why I DNF'd it, I think, or at least I discussed it in like one of my vlogs from the summer. So basically though, the reason I didn't finish it was because, for one, it was extremely long. It was like almost 900 pages, and I would have read through that, you know, all of those pages, but the thing was that the story was so complex, I didn't quite understand what was going on, because the main story was that there was this guy who, his wife died of cancer, and after that, over the course of like a couple years, he starts losing the ability to sleep. It doesn't affect him physically, he just actually loses the complete ability to sleep at all, or for long periods of time. And he doesn't understand why, he doesn't know what's going on. Along with that, there is this whole pro-choice abortion thing going on in this town, and with that there's also this character who is a really abusive individual. He abuses his wife very often, and the main character gets involved with it, and the guy goes to jail, but then he gets out of jail, and there's a lot of things wrapped up in that, and he somehow knows about the main character's inability to sleep, and he knows why. I think there were supposed to be some ties between the Insomnia, the Dark Tower series, and Hearts in Atlantis, I believe somebody had told me, but I didn't understand any of it at the time, and I was just so confused that by about 550 so pages into the book, I finally just DNF'd it because I just had no idea what was even going on. And there are a lot of things about Stephen King's writing that sometimes I don't understand, because he makes little notes throughout the books that are kind of reminiscent of other stories. Like, I didn't know that part of the story had to do with the Dark Tower series. I kind of understood how one aspect was part from Hearts in Atlantis, because I remember a certain individual kind of bad guy character that came up in Hearts in Atlantis when I first read it that showed up in this one. But it was just so bizarre that I really had no idea what was going on. And, you know, I think it might be something I come back to in the future once I've read through more of Stephen King's books and maybe read more of the Dark Tower series, because that seems to have had a great level of importance within Insomnia. Question 2 is the last book you reread. The last book I reread was actually Renegades by Marissa Meyer. I reread this because it was the group book for Team Dairy Maine for the BookTube games, and if we were to read it, we would be completing a challenge to double the pages within the novel. And I actually did, for this reread of it, I did do annotations throughout the entire book, which is the first time I have done that since I was forced to do it for Frankenstein by Mary Shelley in high school. And I have to say, it was actually really satisfying to write little margin notes within this book, because this is one of those books where, like, I know I'm going to keep it for the rest of my life, and I'm comfortable with writing in it because of the fact that it's a little bit more of a sturdy book. If I was to have written in my Beautiful Creatures novels, I would be a little bit more hesitant to, because most of those are paperbacks, and those are a little bit more easy to damage, whereas this is a hardback, so it's going to be perfectly fine for years to come. Question 3 is the last book you bought. The last 2 books I bought were actually for Contemporary-a-thon and for Black-a-thon, and that was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo and the first volume of the Saga graphic novel series. Question 4 is the last book you said you read but didn't. I don't think I've ever said I've read a book but not actually done it. Question 5 is the last book you wrote in the margins of. So for this question, I also am going to pick Renegades, because this is actually the last book I wrote in for any particular purpose, because like I said, this was my group book for the BookTube games, and I just decided to do my annotations of it because I really love this book so much, and not going to be very often that I will write and stuff, but it has to be something I really love and I know is going to last for a very long time. Question 6 is the last book you had signed. So for this one, I actually have kind of a more indie published book, and this is Under the Windowsill by Elizabeth Wayman. I actually met this author at a craft show of all places. So to give a little backstory, my mom is a photographer, and when we were first starting getting her business really up and running, we would go to a lot of craft shows so she could promote her business there at some local schools that were holding these craft shows. And at one of them, there was this author who was from the area that was promoting her book that she had just finished, and this was it. And I got to meet her and talk with her a little bit about, you know, writing. And this is set on Mackinac Island, which was really awesome. And I actually do remember loving this book a lot when I read it. And she said, "Dear Gabby, follow your dreams, Elizabeth Wayman." And I think she wrote Psalm 34:8. but I'm not religious, so I don't know what that psalm is. I probably should just look it up, you know, in order to know what that is and what she wanted me to know. But yeah, she was really, really sweet. I really liked getting to know her and understanding kind of where she was. She told me a lot about kind of a local group of people that are freelance editors, and they kind of, it's just like a kind of writing community that she was a part of that was really helpful with writing this book and everything. Question 7 is the last book you lost. So this is interesting. I wouldn't say I lost it. I would say that I gave it to somebody and they lost it, and it made me very angry until I found a new copy of it recently. So when I was very young, I was obsessed with Hilary Duff. Hilary Duff was one of my most favorite artists, and you might have seen in some of my vlogs, I do have a couple posters of her still in my room from when I was like 6 years old that have not come off my doors. But yeah, I was obsessed with her, and I found out when I think I was probably like 12 or 13 that she had written a book, and it was called Elixir, and it was kind of a interesting, almost urban fantasy-esque story, and was really, really romantic. There was a really interesting romance in it, and I hadn't picked it up since because I thought there was only the one book, and later on I found out there's actually, it's a trilogy, and I have to find out where I can get my hands on the other 2 books because I remember loving Elixir so much. But I ended up giving it to a friend of mine to read, and then I never saw it again. And when I did ask them about it before, they said that they had lost it, they didn't know where it went. So every reader's worst nightmare is to lose their favorite book. So when I was distraught, I was so upset, but luckily enough, I went to the used books section of one of the bookstores I frequent, and I found a copy of it. Here it is in its glory. It is in really good condition. It was used, like I said, and I cannot tell you guys how excited I was to finally be able to get my hands on this again because it was just a wonderful book. I do remember it being absolutely beautiful when I first read it, but it is probably something I would consider rereading to see if it's actually any good now based on my current tastes. And I do still want to get the other 2 books in the series because when I found out that it was a trilogy, I was so surprised because I didn't know that it was a trilogy, but I do remember the ending having been something where I wanted there at least to have been a second book. So I'm really excited to finally have this back in my collection and hopefully be able to love it once again after almost 10 years. Question 8 is the last book you had to replace, which I just really talked about with Elixir. Question 9 is the last book you had an argument over. So when I was still at the Writing Center, I had just finished A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, and I had gotten into a little bit of a dispute with one of my coworkers, mostly because, you know, they were saying that George R.R. Martin was not really all that great, you know, he was kind of just like Tolkien in a way, and in all actuality, I kind of had to argue with them a little bit about it. Not really argue, but kind of talk about it with them because I thought that George R.R. Martin was more interesting because he plays more in the family dynamics and politics within families and royal families, whereas Tolkien focused more on the world aspect. And eventually the person I was talking to actually agreed with me in that respect, but they kind of already had a grudge against Martin, so they weren't really that receptive to it from what I remember. But I do think they agreed with me in the aspect that the overall composition of the novel focused on different things than Tolkien's Lord of the Rings did. And finally, question 10 is the last book you couldn't get hold of. That's like every book I don't have on my shelf and I really want. But there you guys go. Those are all the questions for the last 10 books tag. So if you guys would like to do this yourselves, like I said, the questions will be down in the description below. And if you would like to share with me your answers, go ahead and leave them down in the comments if you would like. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!